guys, I'm Spencer with Utah Airguns. Today we're going to be showing you guys how to set up your scope properly and how to set your eye relief properly specifically to that. So we're going to go through the process of getting your scope mounted on your rifle, leveling it out properly, and then making sure that you set your eye relief properly so you have the maximum comfortability behind your scope. So today we're going to be mounting this Zeiss LRP S3. This is their 4-25 model. We're going to be putting it on an impact. And we're going to go over some of the tools that you're going to need to get your stuff mounted. First thing you're going to need is the Air Marksman scope leveling kit. We're going to use this to first level the gun, and then we're going to use it to level our scope to the gun later once we've established that the gun is level. So we'll show you how to do that too. You're also going to need a set of rings to mount your scope. Today we're going to be using the AccuTac rings. These are the 34mm precision rings. They come with a level built into them, which is pretty cool. I like that feature a lot. You're going to want to make sure that your scope tube diameter, which is this main body here, is the same as the diameter on your ring. So this is a 34mm main tube scope. So you can see we have 34mm rings to put it in. You're going to want a way to reliably torque your scope down to the manufacturer's recommended settings. And so for us to do that, we have our Fix-It 6 kit. This is the Utah Airgun specific one that we had done. It comes with a specific tool for adjusting your regulator with that 2.5mm ball head. So these are awesome. They come with a torque limiter and all the heads you'll need as well as a driver. The other thing you're going to need for one of the methods we're going to show you today is a roll of tape and a flashlight. And I'll show you about it later. It's a really cool trick and you guys are going to really like it. The big question is, why do you want to set up your eye relief correctly? And the answer to that is so that you can be behind the gun as naturally as possible and have the maximum use of your scope and not be fighting your equipment and letting your equipment work for you to take the shots that you need to take. So we're going to go through the process of getting all of that set up. All right, so we got two pieces of equipment here. These both come in the Air Marksman scope leveling kit. This is going to go around the barrel of your gun, and we're going to use this on a flat portion of your rifle. Typically, like on a centerfire rifle, you'd use just your action lugs. Here on the impact, I'll probably use the backbone dovetail rail to set our level. These have a little magnet in it, so if you're using this on a gun that has a steel component, you can stick it onto that. This is an aluminum backbone, so we're just going to set it on and we'll get it leveled out. So we're going to take our barrel clamp. This has the level on top, and we're just going to clamp it around the barrel. And we're not going to really worry about it until we get the gun leveled out first. This is just nice to have on, so you're not fiddling with it afterwards and potentially knocking your gun out of level. So this just goes on and clamps on with these two screws. You don't need to over crank it. You don't want to crush anything. It's got rubber in there to make sure it's grippy, so you just want to get it just snug. And then on top, there's this screw here, which helps pivot the level to make sure that we can line them up later. So now what we'll do is we'll level out the rifle. Next thing we're going to do now that we've got our barrel level mounted is we're going to use this part on the action, or the backbone in this case, of the gun. So I'm going to set it here, and then I have it mounted on a tripod because I shoot a lot of positional stuff. So you'll want to do this in whatever position you're going to shoot from the most. So if you do this prone, you'll want to have your gun prone. And if you do this like shooting off of a bench a lot, if you shoot a lot of bench rest, you'll want it set up on a bench as if you were going to be shooting it at whatever event or style of shooting you're going to do. So I shoot a lot of positional, so we've got it on a tripod. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the gun is level, and I'm just checking this level right here to make sure that we're perfect left and right. I don't really care about up and down so much on this, just left and right. And I'm looking pretty good right off the gate, and if you had to adjust it, you just make small adjustments until you get this right. And what you're going to do is you're going to come over to your scope leveling, the other end of the scope leveling kit, and you're going to use this screw to adjust this level so it matches that level. And then what we're going to do is that's going to allow us to have a reference point in the future for mounting our optic. So I'm just going through and I'm just doing slight measurement or slight adjustments here to where they both match in the dead center of the level lines. And we're looking pretty good. So we can take this off and we can save this for later. Now we know that our gun is level and we have a reference point. The first way we're going to show you how to do this now that we have our rifle leveled out is using the flashlight trick. So this one you're going to need a buddy to help you. So luckily we got Cole behind the camera. He's going to help us out. This is my preferred way of doing it because it makes sure that the gun is set up perfectly for you with how you naturally approach the rifle rather than you trying to fight it and try and set it on your own. So this is my preferred way of doing it, but there's other ways we'll show you after. So what you'll need is you'll need this piece of tape. You're going to pull it off and just get a section of it ripped off, and you're going to put it on the buttstock or the cheek riser of your gun. And we're going to use a marker to write on this. That way the tape is there just to protect your air gun, so you don't have to have any marks on it that you got to wipe off with alcohol or anything later. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this tape to determine where my eye naturally falls on the rifle when I interface with the rifle before I take a shot. We're going to do this without a scope on it. So we'll go ahead and get a marker, and then I'm going to have to hand this to Cole. So what you want to do is you want to get behind your rifle however you shoot it, whether that's prone, on a bench, or positional. Again, I'm shooting positional, so I'm doing it off of a tripod standing. And you're going to get, as if you're going to get on the gun and interface with your rifle, and you're going to close your eyes and drop down into where the optic would be. And then you're going to open your eye. And that's going to put your eye on a specific spot on the scope. Now Cole's going to mark right where my pupil is with a little line. And I'm going to do that maybe 2 or 3 times just to kind of get an average of where my body naturally falls onto the rifle. So again, you're going to break position from the rifle, and you're going to mount the rifle, close your eye, and drop into where the scope would be, and open your eye. And then your buddy will go in and they'll mark it again. So I've got a pretty wide range depending on how you interface with the rifle. So I do that a couple times to kind of get where my body naturally falls. So after doing a bunch of marks and a bunch of tests, it looks like my eye likes to fall right about on these 2 lines most of the time. This one up front was kind of an outlier, so we're going to disregard that. We're going to go where my eyes fall naturally most often. So we're going to use these 2 marks here. So now we're going to go through the process of getting the scope mounted onto the rifle. Alright, so I've got the rings just loosely mounted on the gun, and I've got the ring tops taken off and set aside. We're going to get those on later. One important thing about mounting, this is really especially true on a centerfire rifle, is you want to push the rings forward in the Picatinny slot. Some rings have a little bit more slop than others. These Accutacs are pretty tight, but you always push forward towards the front of the rifle before you tighten things down. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then I have it set to where the saddle of the optic has a little bit on each side. I don't want it too close to the middle here, and I don't want it too close to the ocular or to the objective lens on either side. You don't want to put the rings anywhere where it could crush these transition points. So I like to give it a little bit of room right in the middle. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the flashlight that I have to show you a little bit of a trick with setting your eye relief. Now in order to do this, it's important that you set your magnification to the maximum setting. What this is going to do is this is going to tighten the eye box and make the eye box as least forgiving as the optic can be, since you're in the upper range of your magnification. And you're also going to set your parallax knob to infinity. This basically gives you the tightest point of the eye box for us to measure against. And we're going to shine a light through the front of the optic, and it's going to project what the reticle is back here onto the box. And we're going to use that to determine what the focal point of the optic is with these settings. One safety tip, it's very, very important that you do not look through the scope or have someone look through the scope while you do this. This will be extremely bright. It could potentially damage your eyes, so don't do that. So we're going to turn on the light here, and if you look on the back, when we get the light shining through, you can see that as I move this box back and forth, this circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it hits a very small pinhole, and then it gets larger and larger and larger. Our goal here is to get this tiny pinhole right there to line up with the 2 marks that Cole made earlier where my eye naturally falls on the rifle. So I'm using this as a kind of straight edge to determine where it's currently sitting. So if I'm here, let's see where that lands. So you can see that I'm pretty far off of those lines. I'm about 3/4 of an inch behind that line. So that means I need to move everything forward. Now I have 2 options. I can either slide the optic forward, or I can take the rings off and move the rings. Because I like where this optic is set inside these rings, I'm going to choose to move the entire setup forward. So I'm going to do that. Go forward about an inch or so, we'll go that one. We're going to check it again. So again, here we go on the back. We're going to move the box forward and back until we get that tiny pinhole. And the goal is, boom, right there. So if you look, this is perfectly in line with where those back 2 marks are, which is where my body naturally fell in the rifle multiple times. So that's where I'm going to set the scope. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave the scope here, And I'm going to take a little bit of tape and I'm going to mark on my side. I'll do it on your side so you can see it. But I'm going to put a little mark back here on the tube so I know where back and forward on the scope tube that I want to mount the optic. All right, so I've just taken a piece of tape and pulled a little tag off the top so that it's easy to peel off once I'm done. So what we're going to do here is probably go right here because it gives us the most room. I'm just going to put this piece of tape right in line with that scope tube. Now I know that if I pull the scope out and I set it back down, and I know that that's perfectly forward and back to where my eye relief will be ideal. Now the other thing we've got to do is now we've got to level the optic to the gun, which is where the leveling kit comes back into play. So here, we're going to grab our level that we first used on the action, or the backbone in this case. We're going to put it on top of the turret, and we're going to slowly rotate the optic until it starts to level out. And now my goal, just like before how I was trying to level the barrel level to the action level, now I'm trying to level the scope level to the level on the barrel so that I know that everything is true to how the gun is sitting. So I'm going to get on this side. And the reason you want to get this level is because as you shoot further distances and you dial up, if your scope is not level, it can introduce errors in your firing solution. You can miss left or right based on how the optic is canted in the scope rings. Pretty damn good. I'm pretty happy with that. I've got my level, the bubble in the level dead in the middle up here and dead in the middle down here. Now it's important I have not touched this barrel level since I first trued it to the action. So this still has not changed, and I've just moved the optic to where it's now all level. So now we're going to take our scope rings and screw them down. This is where the fix-it sticks come in handy. This one has a ratchet system, which is really nice, and a little handle to hold and free spin if you need to. So I'm just going to loosely get these rings tightened down, and then we'll slowly torque them to the manufacturer's specs when we have them all set. I'm just slowly going back and forth in a crisscross pattern, and I'm not torquing these down. You can see I'm just barely finger tight on this, and I'm trying to make it so that the ring gap on each side, and by ring gap what I mean is this little gap right in between the rings, I want that gap to be even. I'm just going to slowly snug it down, and now that this front ring is finger tight, this scope won't move on its own unless you like really yanked on it, but setting up the scope like this is going to be good enough. I'm going to now recheck to make sure that I'm level. So reference my barrel level and my scope level, and I'm still good. What can happen is as you tighten down your scope rings, it can twist if you do one side too much over the other. So I know I'm good to go. I'm nice and level. I'm going to get these hand tight down, and then we're going to torque them to the manufacturer's recommended specs. Again, going back and forth in a crisscross pattern, you don't want to go in like a box. This is just a way to keep the torque even across the scope rings. And that looks good to me. So I can now remove this tape, and now we can use the best part of the fix-it sticks, which is the torque limiter. This is the fix-it sticks all-in-one torque limiter. You can see that it's got inch-pound lines all the way across it. And the way these work is you put the bit that you need to torque into the driver, and then you put the driver into the torque handle. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look up the manufacturer's recommended torque specs, and we're going to follow them. Follow them. Do it. If you don't, you can damage your optic. I've seen it happen. So do it. Follow their instructions. For Zeiss, they recommend 2.5 Newton meters, which equates to 22 inch-pounds. So we're going to use the limiter here to torque this to right under 25 inch-pounds. And again, we're going to go in a star pattern. And as you twist, you'll see that these lines start to line up, and right about there is just under 25, so 22 inch-pounds. I'm going to go across into the other end of the scope ring, and I'm going to do the same thing. You can see that ring slowly tightening down until we get to 22 inch-pounds. And you do that to every screw on both sets of the rings. Now we're going to torque down our bases. Again, use your manufacturer recommended torque specifications. All right, our scope is now level and set. So now what we can do is we can check. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get behind the gun, and it helps if you point the rifle towards not a bright light, but not a dark corner. So I'm going to point it a little bit in towards one of our studio lights here so I can get a little bit of light through it. And again, set your magnification all the way to max, drop into the scope, and it should be perfect every time. And by perfect, you shouldn't see any scope shadow. You shouldn't have to hunt back and forwards for it. It should just fall naturally, and you should be able to see the entire optic at max magnification. And now when you go into your lower magnifications where you normally shoot, not towards the high end, a lot of application of scope usage is more like that 70% range. You have an even more forgiving eye relief because that eye relief gets a little bit larger because that exit pupil gets larger the lower your magnification goes. So that's my favorite method of mounting your scope, but it requires a buddy. So we're going to show you how to do it without a buddy. All right, so we're getting ready to unmount the scope. I have a quick little tip with your fix-it sticks. Do not loosen screws with the torque limiter attached. The torque limiter is designed specifically to tighten, and if you go reverse and you try and loosen with it, it can damage your torque limiter. So make sure you take that off before you begin loosening screws. So everything up to the point of getting the scope on the gun is the exact same using the solo method. The only difference is you're not going to have the tape marks on the back to use the cool flashlight trick. But everything else is still the same. We've still got our bubble level, which I actually have to re-level out now because I moved the gun. And now it's super easy to use this ball head on this Really Right Stuff tripod to get it back to level. So now what we're going to do, the only difference is I've got these rings loose, really loose. And that's so that I can manipulate the scope back and forth from behind the gun, because you're going to have to do this while looking through your scope. Now it's important to try and keep in mind your natural body positioning when you want to do this by yourself. Because what you have a tendency to do is you have a tendency to try and hunt back and forward to make your body fit the optic rather than making the optic fit where you want it to be. So again, we're going to make our magnification and parallax all the way to maximum. So I'm at 25 power on this LRP. And same thing, I'm going to get down to where I can see the optic, and I'm going to move this scope forward and backwards until I have the perfect sight picture. And I can do that because I have these rings really loose. I can move it back and forward until I can just have the perfect amount of back and forward play to where there's zero scope shadow. For me, that's about there. But it's not level yet. It's pretty close, but not quite level. So and I can check this again by breaking position, closing my eyes, getting behind the gun, and opening it. And I should be able to see perfectly. And right now I can't. So I'm going to leave it here. So once you've figured out where back and forward is good for you, you want to ensure that you still have a good amount of room from the transition to the bell of the optic up here, as well as your ocular housing back here. You don't want to be close to the saddle of the optic or the bell or the ocular of the optic, so you don't want to crush anything. So I'm looking at this and it looks good here. So now we're going to take our level, and it's going to be the same thing that we did with the other version, just I manually have moved the scope to me instead. It can be a little bit more tricky to do because you have to do it all yourself rather than using measurements on the gun to do it. But everything from there is the exact same. If you needed to adjust your scope after it's been leveled and set in your rings, let's say you're moving it to a different gun, right? So we'll pull this off and we'll say that we're moving this to a different gun of some kind. So now the optic comes all the way off. Now that we have the optic mounted and leveled in these rings, we don't need to go through the process of taking everything apart and putting it back on again, because we know the rings are level to the optic. So if I was going to come up and I was going to put it on a different gun, then you could just come up, mount your optic, push it forward to take up all the slack, and screw your scope bases down and torque them to the manufacturer's suggested torque specifications. So the nice thing about the M4 specifically is we have this sliding dovetail rail. So let's say that you just quickly needed to make a really small adjustment. You didn't want to go and pull all of your scope off, or you need to make a small adjustment that's in between Picatinny slots. You can loosen these up, and then this whole system will slide back and forth on the dovetail. So you can change it very, very easily with just 4 screws, right? So you can get this to be wherever you need to. Let's say a little bit closer because you have a youth shooter shooting with you and they have a shorter neck. So you need to pull the optic closer so you can get them behind it and slide this back and forth until you get it to where the other shooter can see it, right? So now that you've got your optic set, you can remove your barrel level and you are good to go, and your scope should be mounted and level, and you should have the perfect eye relief. So that's 2 surefire ways to set up your scope, mount it level, and make sure you have proper eye relief to make sure that your rifle system fits you perfectly. There's multiple other ways to do it. This is just 2. These are 2 of my favorite ways. One is my favorite way, and the other one is the easiest way to do it by yourself. So feel free to shoot us any questions you guys have down in the comments. We'll be sure to answer them for you guys. Have a good one.